mountains of Appalachia, legends often start with whispers about isolation, hunger, or bloodlines cursed by the land. But the story of the Norcross Clan is different. Their tale doesn't begin with starvation, it begins with excess. Long before the name Norcross became synonymous with madness, they were one of the wealthiest families in their county. Landowners, merchants, men who wielded money and power like weapons. They built a mansion where most could barely afford cabins. A sprawling wooden estate with whitewashed walls and ornate iron gates that seemed absurdly out of place in the wilderness. Locals called it the Norcross House, though in time they would call it something far darker, the House of Decay. Inside, the family lived not by the rules of church or community, but by their own twisted laws. They married only within the family to preserve their wealth. Cousin took cousin, uncle took niece. The Norcross bloodline was bound by its own reflection, folding in on itself until the children born of it carried wide-set eyes, twisted jaws, and hands with too many fingers. But the Norcrosses did not hide these deformities. They celebrated them. To outsiders, they spoke of purity. To one another, they whispered of the mark of chosen flesh. It was said their meals were as grotesque as their unions. While neighbors scraped by on beans and cornbread, the Norcrosses threw feasts that stretched late into the night. Whole hogs roasted, barrels of whiskey cracked open, and dishes brought to the table that no one outside the family could name. Meat too dark, too stringy, bones cracked open for marrow, organs stewed with herbs. Outsiders who attended said the family ate with a frenzy, their mouths slick with grease and blood, their laughter echoing down the halls like hyenas. Those who excused themselves early swore they heard screaming from the kitchens as they left. But wealth does not last forever. The mines they invested in collapsed, the railroads passed them by, and their fortune dwindled to dust. The mansion that had once gleamed with candles now sagged with rot. The family turned inward, deeper into their obsessions. They walled off rooms, sealing them with chains. They burned their own fields rather than sell them. And when hunger finally returned, as it always does in Appalachia, the Norcrosses turned not to neighbors, but to themselves. It is whispered that the first feast was held after a daughter was born, still and lifeless. Rather than bury her, they cooked her, served her, and devoured her in silence. From that night on, the line between feast and ritual vanished. Travelers in the 1870s spoke of seeing shadows in the Norcross windows, flickering as though the family danced around firelight. Hunters who passed too close reported hearing music drifting through the trees, fiddle and banjo rising into laughter that broke into screams. Some who dared to approach the house claimed to see figures standing on the porch at night, gaunt and deformed, watching with unblinking eyes. One boy swore that when he crept closer, he saw a long dining table lit by dozens of candles, the family feasting on something pale and limp stretched across the wood. By the turn of the century, the mansion was half. The roof sagged, the shutters hung loose, and weeds strangled the once proud gates. Yet the Norcrosses remained, refusing to leave the house that had birthed their madness. Locals avoided the property. Though some claimed to glimpse figures scuttling between the trees on all fours, their limbs bent at impossible angles. The name Norcross became a curse, a warning, and always the same question lingered. What do they eat, when no farm, no store, no herd remains? The answer was whispered with dread. They eat each other. And they eat anyone who wanders too close. Asterisk as the 1900s dragged forward. The Norcross mansion became more rumor than reality. The county sheriff refused to step foot near the property, insisting it was family land. Preachers warned children never to follow the winding road that disappeared into the hills where the Norcrosses lived. And yet, people went missing. At first it was trappers, men who wandered deep into the woods and never returned. Their traps were later found hanging empty, as though someone had collected them, but their bodies were never recovered. Then it was traveler salesmen who dared to knock on doors too far out into the backcountry. Their wagons were sometimes found on the roadside, horses standing nervously nearby, reins cut clean through. Locals noticed the disappearances always happened within a mile of the Norcross estate. No one had proof, but everyone had suspicion. Whispers grew darker when children began to vanish. In 1912, two brothers Samuel and Eli Watts wandered into the woods to hunt rabbits. They never came back. Their mother said she heard screams echo from the hollow that night, screams too high-pitched to be from animals. She begged the sheriff to investigate, but he refused. By then, most knew why. Some claimed the Norcrosses paid him in meat from their hunts. Others believed he was simply too terrified to face what lingered in that rotting house. Still, the legend persisted. The Norcrosses were said to hold midnight ceremonies on the solstice and equinox, dragging strangers into their halls and binding them to the dining table. The feasts had become rituals of power, not survival blood, spilled across the floor. Flesh carved with precision, laughter rising into shrieks as the family tore apart their victims. It was not hunger that drove them, but devotion. They worshipped themselves, their pure bloodline, their grotesque children, who were treated as prophets. Some were born blind, some born with twisted faces, but within the clan, they were celebrated as divine. Outsiders called them monsters. The Norcrosses called them saints by the 1930s. The Great Depression hit Appalachia hard, but the Norcross family's reputation only grew more terrifying. Wandering hobos, desperate for food, sometimes dared to knock on their doors. Few were seen again. One man who escaped told a story no one wanted to believe. He claimed he was invited to supper in the mansion's grand hall. The family sat at a long, splintered table, candles flickering, their eyes glowing yellow in the light. Plates were set before him, thick slabs of meat, roasted and dripping. He asked what kind of meat it was. They only laughed. When he refused to eat, they circled him, their faces stretching into inhuman grins. He fled through a broken window, glass tearing his arm. When locals found him, he was half delirious, screaming that they weren't eating pork. His testimony was ignored. He disappeared soon after, perhaps from shame, perhaps because the Norcrosses hunted him down. The estate itself became a nightmare to those brave enough to glance at it. Windows were boarded shut, but behind them, light still flickered. The walls sagged with mold, but smoke rose from the chimneys. Some said they could hear music playing, not just fiddles and banjos, but broken records replaying the same warped tune, slowing and distorting until the sound was inhuman. More than one hunter swore he saw figures crawling on the roof like spiders, limbs bent backward, mouths open in silent laughter. What terrified locals most, however, were the woods surrounding the mansion. The trees themselves seemed wrong, stripped of bark, carved with strange symbols resembling spirals and stretched faces. Bones hung from branches, strung together with wire and sinew, clacking in the wind like chimes. Some were animal bones, others weren't. Then came the discovery that forced the town into silence. In 1947, after a flood washed through the hollow, debris was carried downstream into the valley. Among the wreckage were fragments of human remains, teeth, jawbones, and a child's small femur. They had been boiled clean. No one doubted where they had come from, yet the sheriff still refused to intervene. The Norcrosses were too many, too dangerous, and too deep in their madness. By mid-century, the family no longer ventured into town at all. Their isolation was total, and yet, the missing persons reports continued. Truckers along back roads claimed to see figures in the trees, pale, hunched bodies, sprinting alongside their vehicles on all fours, keeping pace with impossible speed. Farmers reported livestock gutted and left in patterns on their fields, like offerings. And once, a group of teenagers who dared each other to trespass swore they found a pit behind the mansion, filled with bones. Some were fresh, some were brittle with age, but all bore marks of teeth. The Norcrosses were no longer human in the eyes of Appalachia. They had become something else, a clan, beyond morality, beyond survival, feeding not just on flesh but on the terror their legend inspired. Still, no one dared confront them. The mansion rotted further, its roof collapsing inward, but the fires never stopped burning inside, and through it all, the same question haunted those who lived nearby. How many people had the Norcross family consumed? Hundreds, thousands. The true answer was locked away in the walls of that cursed house, in the dining hall where candlelight never seemed to die. By the late 20th century, the Norcross family had become more ghost story than memory. Parents told their children never to wander past the hollow, warning them that the Norcrosses took what they wanted when they hungered. Teenagers dared each other to sneak up the road at night, but most never made it beyond the tree line. Even in daylight, the woods around the mansion seemed different, quieter. The birds absent, as though the land itself held its breath. But then, the stories began again. In 1978, two college students from out of state, eager to film an amateur documentary on Appalachian folklore, drove into the backcountry and never returned. Their car was discovered at the edge of the Norcross Hollow, doors open, camera equipment scattered in the dirt. The film reels were missing. Authorities chalked it up to a robbery, but locals knew better. They whispered that the Norcrosses had claimed new prey, and perhaps had found a way to preserve the images they feared would expose them. Through the 80s and 90s, hikers and campers reported strange encounters in the hollow. Some said they heard chanting in the distance, words in no language they recognized. Others swore they saw children pale, malformed, with eyes too far apart, standing silently at the edge of their camps, only to vanish when confronted. One group even reported a figure crawling out of the Norcross mansion itself, a woman with hair down to her knees, teeth sharpened to points, who shrieked when the beam of a flashlight touched her face before retreating into the collapsing house. The most disturbing account came in 1994, when a group of urban explorers entered the mansion itself. Only one of them, a man named Luke Barrett, returned. Shaking and pale, he told police the others had gone missing inside. He described long hallways lined with portraits, family members with distorted features, eyes gouged out of the canvas. He claimed the dining room was still set, plates of rotting meat left as though a feast had ended only hours before. But what terrified him most were the sounds: scuttling footsteps on the ceiling, heavy breathing in the walls, and laughter that followed them through every corridor. Barrett refused to speak further, vanishing from town weeks later. Modern Appalachia has not forgotten the Norcrosses. Hunters still swear the hollow is alive, with movement at night. Drivers claim that if you stop your car near the old road, you'll see figures watching from the trees. Some insist the mansion has finally collapsed, the woods swallowing it whole. But others argue the Norcrosses still live beneath it, tunneling into the earth like moles, their feasts continuing in subterranean halls no one dares to find. The most chilling part of the legend, however, lies in the bloodline itself. Descendants of the Norcross name occasionally appear in nearby towns, though they never admit their heritage. Locals describe them as strange faces, oddly symmetrical yet off, eyes too intense, teeth sharp where they shouldn't be. Some say these descendants are trying to blend into society. Others insist they're scouts, watching, waiting for the clan to rise again in full. Even now, hikers disappear in those hills. Missing person posters appear on gas station corkboards, faces smiling from photographs that will never be updated. When asked, the locals always say the same thing: they wandered too close to the Norcross Hollow. No evidence, no bodies, only silence, and the knowledge that the Norcross family legend is never truly gone. Because in Appalachia, hunger does not die. It waits, and some families, twisted by blood and ritual, never stop feeding. The Norcross clan may have fallen into ruin, their mansion rotted, and their name whispered with disgust, but their legacy is eternal. If you listen on the right night, with the wind crawling through the trees. You might still hear the echoes of their feast, the crack of bone, the shriek of laughter, the scraping of knives against flesh, and if you see eyes staring back at you from the darkness, unblinking, glowing faintly yellow, it may already be too late. Otrukitachi. Norcross Clan wasn't just a family. They were a nightmare given flesh, a dynasty of madness that refused to die. But Appalachia is filled with stories just like this one, forgotten bloodlines, twisted rituals, and horrors that thrive in the shadows where outsiders rarely tread. Do you believe the Norcrosses are truly gone? Or do their descendants still walk among us? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story disturbed you, just wait until you hear the next one. Make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, because in these mountains, there are always more families waiting to be unearthed. Remember, legends fade, but hunger never does.